Please rise. Shira Malos. Abotchem Badonai Kahar Tzion Lo Yimot La'olam Yeshev. Yerushalayim Harim Saviv La Badonai Saviv Li'amo Me'atav Yad Olam. Ki lo yanuach shevet haresha al gorel tzadikim leman lo yishlechu tzadikim bi'avlasa yedehem. Heitiva Adonai latovim v'lisharim b'libosam v'hamatim akal kolosam yolichem Adonai es polei oven. Shalom al Yisrael. Not too long ago, some of you might have heard on the way home from work or home, there was a serious incident in a stadium in the United Kingdom with several fatalities, and the details of this event are just becoming known now. So for those who have been injured in that event, we're going to say Evi Sheberach, and for all, Chol. Yishavarech Avoseinu Argamis of Yaakov Yivarech as Kol HaCholim HaPiguim HaPitzuim Bavur Shani Noder Tzedakah Bavuram. Schar Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Lachlimam L'Rachosam Lachizgam Lachiyosam Yishlach Lahem Meher Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim L'Chol Ivarem L'Chol Gideim B'Soch Shar Cholei Yisrael B'Soch Shar Cholim Refuah HaNefesh Refuah HaGuf Hashta B'Galav Bizman Kariv V'Nomar Amen. Please be seated. I'd like to call on Norman Lerner, the chairman of our adult education program in the Mars Schnabel Adult Education Institute.
Could I ask everybody to please turn off your phones or lower your phones so they won't interrupt? Thank you very much. On behalf of Kingsway's, our center's program, I want to welcome you to this evening, our Yom Yerushalayim event. Before I start with introducing the event, I want to thank our many sponsors, and one in particular, Dr. Friedrich Schnabel, without whose help to the Morris Schnabel Adult Education Institute, these excellent programs would be near impossible to put on. So we thank you. Our guest tonight is well known in both the general community and particularly in the American Jewish community. A quick reading of his bio tells us that he's a Brooklyn boy. A student. Did you hear me in the back? Thank you. Okay. Hello. Yeah. Technology. Okay. A student at Eitz Chaim Yeshiva, where he described himself as being terrible. Another described him as graduating from that institution summa cum juris. After being rejected from YU, he was later to receive an honorary degree from that institution. He attended Brooklyn College, where he and other Orthodox friends decided to form the first Orthodox house plan, Night House, a place where Orthodox young men could form athletic teams and parties could be staged nights other than Friday. Having excellent grades, he was accepted to Yale University School of Law, where he excelled, became editor of Law Review, wrote scholarly articles that were noted in the Ivy Leagues, and at 28, he was asked by Harvard to become a professor of law, Harvard's youngest. He was selected by Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg to be his law clerk. No small honor or no small task. But even before that, our speaker was chosen to clerk by another distinguished justice, David Bazelon of the Federal Court of Appeals. Like Goldberg, Bazelon was also a Jew who passed on his Jewish values to those, like our speaker, who he instructed. Bazelon said, if a defendant was worthy and deserved compassion, but not strictly deserving of a writ of habeas corpus or other legal remedy, Judge Bazelon suggested we find some other grounds for leniency, for issuing a writ of Rachmanis for the defendant. Our guest honed this sense of Rachmanis for others, combined with a sense of justice. Feeling hurt and outrage at being discriminated against by major WASP law firms who would not hire him because of his Jewishness and/or his Orthodox observance, he later took on the case of an Italian-American lawyer working at one of these major firms who kept being passed over for promotion because he felt it was because of his Italian ethnicity. When told by Jews to go easy on that particular law firm because they had a better policy towards their Jewish lawyers than their Italian Catholic ones, he bristled. Discrimination is discrimination. If you do it against one, you can do it against others. The case was won, and it helped force major firms in the legal profession to live up to the ideals of American justice. Our speaker has been a constant champion of justice and Jewish causes. He has defended Jews and Israel. I'm okay with that. Okay.
Everybody else.
He has defended Jews and Israel against slanderers and anti-Semites. When Avi Weiss and Jewish students were roughed up by a mob in Poland for the offense of demonstrating against the Carmelite convent that had established itself on the very doorfront of Auschwitz, and then the Polish Cardinal Glemp publicly defamed Jews and this particular group as trying to murder the nuns and saying Jews were Nazi collaborators and spreaders of communism, our speaker rose to the occasion and sued Glemp. The Cardinal had an American visit planned for a very long while, but fearing being served by a summons on American soil, he was forced to cancel the visit. But our speaker, ever a gadfly, pursued the Cardinal back to Poland. When Pat Buchanan, who had been an official of the Reagan White House and who made a presidential run, when Buchanan defended the likes of Carl Linnaeus and John de Munich and Klaus Barbie, war criminals, our speaker called out Buchanan as he later called out John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt for their attacks on what they called the Jewish lobby. In 2006, during the Israeli-Lebanon conflict, he defended the IDF against charges of war crimes. Israel, he wrote, has every self-interest in minimizing civilian casualties, whereas the terrorists have every self-interest in maximizing civilian casualties on both sides. Israel, he said, should not be criticized for doing what every democracy would do, taking reasonable military steps to stop the killing of their own civilians. In an age of rising anti-Semitism, and especially rising anti-Zionism, our speaker has stood up for us and for Israel. You can read his book, The Case for Israel, where he presents his arguments in the full-throated way only he can. So, we are very near the anniversary of the Six-Day War, and this is the week of Yom Yerushalayim. We here at Kingsway are proud to present our speaker in a dialogue with our Rabbi, Rabbi Tokayer. A dialogue where he will be fielding many of our questions and concerns.
So at this time, I introduce the former Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law, a constitutional scholar, author, TV commentator, and recipient of the Menachem Begin Award of Honor, Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Good evening, everyone. Mentioned a little earlier that 1991, Professor Dershowitz wrote a book entitled Chutzpah. And at that time, a gentleman by the name of Leonard Fine wrote a scathing, brutal critique of the book. And he said, I can't understand why this book has been so successful. He suggested maybe it was because there were some high-profile cases at the time, Klaus von Bülow and others, a film about Klaus von Bülow where Professor Dershowitz was portrayed. He suggested maybe that Jews like books. And then he said the following, and I would like to quote. Finally, Dershowitz is a celebrity. Even, he's writing 26 years ago, even if Donald Trump he's not, and celebrity books do well. Still, it's a puzzlement. So, Professor Dershowitz, you are not Donald Trump, as far as I know, but perhaps you'll have something to say about the president in a few moments, and we will hopefully be able to draw out some of your thoughts, not only about the president and his role in the Middle East, as well as more generally. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. Let's start off with perhaps a more broad question, and that is, you've had a long and distinguished career in academia. You're quote-unquote retired now, but in your retirement, you seem to be more active and more present than ever before, and primarily, from my perspective, advocating for Israel like the Energizer Bunny. Every time you turn around, you see him on TV. So my question is, where does this motivation come from to spend your retirement years this way? And why are you spending so much time on it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I feel like I'm back home. I grew up in Brooklyn, not far from here. I was born in Williamsburg, and then my parents moved us to Borough Park, and went to Yerushalayim and Brooklyn Technical Academy, and then Brooklyn College, where I walked to Brooklyn College most of the time and walked through Flatbush and loved it. The motive comes from the fact that I was always taught by my father, by my mother, that as a Jew you have to defend the underdog, and you really have to. I was saying before in my bar mitzvah seder, it was tzedek, tirdof, shoftim, and it really had an impact on me. And for the first years of my professional life, I didn't need to defend Israel. Everybody loved Israel. I started to defend Israel basically when the hard left turned against Israel. When people like Noam Chomsky and the Reverend Daniel Berrigan and others began to single out Israel for condemnation. And I hate double standards. And when that happened, I really began to understand Hillel's admonition, Imena Nili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am for myself alone, what am I? Well, I had been doing the second part of that for years. I had been defending African Americans in the civil rights movement. I've been defending people on death row, been defending free speech rights. I'll never forget my first argument in the United States Supreme Court. My co-counsel on the case was another Orthodox Jew named Nathan Lewin, one of the greatest lawyers in American history. And guess what we were defending in front of the Supreme Court? An erotic film named I Am Curious Yellow. Two Orthodox Jews standing in front of the... So there was nothing Jewish about the first years of my professional life. And then a few things happened. One, I read Elie Wiesel's book, The Jews of Silence, and it had an enormous impact on me. I grew up in Borough Park with a lot of Holocaust survivors, and I saw what was going on with Soviet Jewry, and I saw that the American liberals were not concerned about it. And I got to meet Ellie. He was a young man then. I was a young man then. And Ellie sent me to Russia, to the Soviet Union, to the belly of the beast, to meet these dissidents. And I went, and it changed my life. At the same time, I was representing Rabbi Meir Kahane, the Jewish Defense League, and I certainly didn't approve of his tactics. I approved of many of his ideas, but not his tactics of violence. And so I decided really to devote my career to trying to achieve the results that Kahane wanted to achieve, but through law rather than through violence. And so I really was turned to my defense of Israel by the left turning against Israel. I always thought of myself as a person of the left. I was a civil libertarian, a liberal, a Democrat. My favorite people were John Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey, and the two judges I clerked for, both liberal Jewish justices. And then to see the left turn against Israel in this thoughtless way really persuaded me that I had to allocate a substantial part of my professional life to the defense of Israel. And in the beginning, it was easy. And in fact, I'm writing a book about this now. I'm writing a memoir of defending Israel over 50 years and how easy it was in 67, in the run-up to the Six-Day War, Yom Yerushalayim we're celebrating. It was easy. I went around Harvard. Everybody was willing to defend and support Israel. It turned in the early 70s, around 1972, 73, 74. And how much harder it's gotten now. And on university campuses today, you can't find faculty members who are prepared to stand up for Israel. I get called every year to speak at Columbia University. I always have the same response. I'm a Harvard professor. Get a Columbia professor. There are no Columbia professors who will speak up for Israel. They'll speak up for Israel privately, at home on Shabbat, in their shuls, perhaps in Hillel, but ask them to speak out publicly, and they won't do it because they're terrified it will affect their student evaluations, and it will. It will affect their getting into honor societies, and it will. It will affect their ability to get honorary degrees, and it will. It will have all of these impacts, but tenure means you have to have a little bit of courage. And in 50 years of teaching at Harvard, Stanford, NYU, Hebrew University, I have never met a group of less courageous people than tenured professors. And I have to tell you, Hebrew University is among the worst. Among the worst. Israeli universities are among the worst. Israeli universities have more anti-Israel radicals who are prepared to speak up than most American universities. And many American universities that have anti-Israel radicals, many of them come from Israel. And it's shocking when you hear, and it's called the argument by ethnic identification. If they're Jewish, and if they're Israeli, and if they're anti-Israel, they must be telling the truth. Well, it's nonsense. You read Haaretz. There is no comparable newspaper in the United States to Haaretz. No newspaper that so attacks the government and the country the way Haaretz does Israel. And you find that among professors as well. So I'm in retirement. I'm an emeritus professor. I'm supposed to be relaxing and taking it easy. And I think I've never worked harder. When I was a professor, people would say, come make a speech. I'd say, no, I'm teaching. I have my teaching schedule. That excuse is gone. So I'm now busier than I ever was, and I hope to stay busy for as long as Hashem gives me the courage and the strength to do it.
Now to a lighter topic. President Trump is in the middle of his...
The only thing light about President Trump is his hair.
President Trump is in the middle of his first international trip, and he's in Israel today. You have, in other contexts, shared a story about how you met President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Perhaps you could share that, and then more broadly, what your assessment is about President Trump and his impact on Israel and on its future.
Well, I've had the, I wouldn't say pleasure, but the honor of, in the last couple of months, meeting with President Trump about Israel, meeting with President Abbas, and meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And as a result of those three meetings, I have a slightly more optimistic view, but only slightly more optimistic view. Look, we have no place to go but up. There's been no worse administration for Israel than the second Obama administration. It was just awful. And what he did at the end by allowing that UN resolution to go through, I can't wait to meet him in Martha's Vineyard. You know, he was a student at Harvard Law School. I knew him well. I knew his wife well. I can't wait to meet him in Martha's Vineyard and point my finger at him and say, Mr. President, you look me in the eye and you tell me that you don't believe the Kotel is legitimately part of Israel, that you believe that the Kotel is, quote, illegally occupied territory. And if it was, what were you doing there? Why did you go to the Kotel when you were campaigning? Did you not know at the time that your views would be as they were? It's the most absurd conclusion that anybody can reach, whether you're a historian, a lawyer, or a person of common sense, to believe that the Kotel is illegally occupied territory. Let me spend a minute giving you a little bit of the history. You probably know it. When the United Nations in 1947, I remember it like it was yesterday, sitting with my little 10-inch black and white television with my father in Borough Park, watching the debate with Rabbi at the Security Council and dancing in the streets when the United Nations, by a relatively close vote, voted to partition the mandate of Palestine into a nation state for the Jewish people, a nation state for the Arab people, and here's the key, an area that was going to become internationalized. And that area, everybody knows, included Jerusalem. How many people know that that area that was supposed to be international also included Bethlehem? People don't realize that. And so what happened then is Israel was attacked after it announced its independence. It was attacked by all the surrounding Arab countries, and Jordan then illegally occupied the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem, the Hebrew University access road, the Hadassah Hospital access road, the Kotel, and that entire area. They also, and this is interesting, illegally occupied Bethlehem. They had no right to occupy Bethlehem, but nobody complained about it. There wasn't a single UN resolution. And when they destroyed the Hurva synagogue and all the other beautiful synagogues in the Jewish quarter, some of which went back hundreds of years, not a peep from UNESCO, not a peep from the United Nations. The word occupied was never, ever used. Then, flash forward to 1967, Levi Eshkol sends a message to King Hussein, who everybody thinks was this great man. King Hussein, who was a genocidal murderer, was told by Eshkol, do not attack Israel. Israel was at the time in a war with Syria and Egypt. Do not attack Israel, and if you don't, the Israelis will not set one foot into Jordanian territory. We will not even try to recapture the Western Wall. Of course, Jordan attacked. They attacked by sending rockets into civilian areas of West Jerusalem, a war crime. Israel responded at great loss of life by capturing the Kotel, by capturing the Jewish quarter, and by occupying the West Bank. How that is anything but liberating Jerusalem from an illegal occupation, I will never understand. But today, the President of the United States, who has done a great job, I think, in his speech in Saudi Arabia, and most of what he said in Israel, particularly what he said about Iran, would not go to the Kotel with the Prime Minister of Israel, because that would establish that Israel legitimately controlled the Kotel. But he is going tomorrow to Bethlehem with the President of the Palestinian Authority, which it seems to me is completely contradictory to his refusal to go with the Prime Minister to the Kotel. So there's so much inconsistency, so much hypocrisy that is going on. But the UN resolution does declare all these areas to be illegally occupied. I went to a Red Sox game recently, opening game in Fenway Park, and who do I sit next to but John Kerry? And so I put the question to him, whether he thought it was illegally occupied territory, the Kotel. Oh boy, you should have heard the obfuscation in the answer. I think it took about 3 innings before he could finally come to a conclusion. And I, to this day, don't understand exactly what he said. But there's so much hypocrisy going around. But I have to give President Trump a lot of credit. He stated today one of the most important statements in modern American-Israeli relations. He said Iran will never, ever, and he went off script to emphasize ever, never, ever be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. That's very different from Obama saying 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, we'll put it off, we'll postpone it. Maybe they won't, maybe they will. It must become American policy that Iran will never become another North Korea. Because if you think North Korea is bad, multiply that 100-fold. Because Iran already has the delivery system to deliver its nuclear weapons. North Korea is struggling to develop a delivery system. Half of their rockets fall into the ocean. The other half are provided by China. So they may have a problem with their delivery system. Iran already has a delivery system capable of hitting Israel and as far as Italy and other NATO countries, Turkey, etc. So the idea that Iran having a nuclear arsenal would be an absolute disaster. And I broke with President Obama over that issue. He called me into the Oval Office early at the end of his first term, just before he was running for the second term. He asked me to sit down with him. We sat down. We talked about Iran. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Alan, you know me. You know I would never break my word. I'm telling you that Iran is not going to be able to develop nuclear weapons." And then, of course, he made a deal under which Iran could develop nuclear weapons. He fooled me into voting for him and supporting him. And he fooled a lot of people into making that decision. And if I had any idea that he was going to write the Iran deal the way he did, and that he was going to have a UN resolution that he didn't veto. And by the way, I believe that Samantha Powers, who was also my student, the UN representative from the United States, I think she was prepared. I think she wrote her speech as a veto speech. And then at the last minute got a very surprising message from a president who was just taking revenge against Benjamin Netanyahu. It was a very personal act to allow that UN resolution to go through.
You had, when we spoke earlier, asked you how you'd like to title this evening. The title topic that you offered was Yom Yerushalayim through the eyes of Presidents Obama and Trump. So what do you mean by Yom Yerushalayim through the eyes of Presidents Obama and Trump?
Look, Yom Yerushalayim is a very important day in our life. Just an anecdote. It must have been 3 years ago. Probably some of you know, I'm a very close personal friend of Bibi and Sarah Netanyahu. I've known Bibi since he was a 22-year-old graduate student at MIT. We met in 1970 when we were both on a show called The Advocates, advocating for Israel, and we've remained very, very close friends since. And every time I go to Israel, whether with my wife or my children or my grandchildren, we always have dinner at the same table that President Trump is having dinner or had dinner tonight with Bibi and Sarah. And 3 years ago, I was having dinner, and it was winding down. It was about 11 o'clock, and I was about to go home. He said, "Come on, Alan," and my son Elon, "Come on, Elon, get into the car with me. Where are you taking us? Surprise." Prime Minister says, "Get in the car, surprise." So he took us to the yeshiva. I forget the name of it. Something Ateret HaKohanim, maybe it's called. Right? Yeah. And he was going to be delivering a speech on Yom Yerushalayim, and he took us with him to the speech, and he started out by saying, "You know, this is a yeshiva, and I have with me a Talmud Chacham." He says, "I didn't go to yeshiva, but my friend Alan did, and maybe he can deliver a Dvar Torah without any preparation, of course." So I had to try to do it in English, you know, a little Yiddish, a little English, a little Bible, a little Hebrew. But it was only a minute, so it worked, a minute or two, so it worked. That was the night he declared that, you know, Jerusalem would never be divided, that it was the commitment of the nation of Israel, that it would remain a united city, but it could be a city which could accommodate a Palestinian presence as well. You know, you don't have to divide a city to create a presence. We have 5 boroughs in Manhattan. It's all an integral part in New York, an integral part of New York City. And you can have an Arab section, a Palestinian section. Look at the old city. It has an Armenian quarter, a Jewish quarter, an Arab quarter. These things are doable. If you have the will to do it, it can be done. I do think that I thought before today, certainly, that President Trump would have a different view of Yerushalayim than President Obama did. That remains to be seen. He made a promise. Many American presidential candidates have made promises about bringing the embassy. And I think once the embassy of the United States is moved to Jerusalem, virtually every embassy will follow. And it's about time, because Jerusalem is the capital. No other country in the world is second-guessed about its capital. Only Israel with Jerusalem. I do think that it will happen during the Trump administration. I think it won't happen right away. I think it will happen as part of a process that will involve the Saudis, the Emirates. Right now, I think Israel is in a strategically strong position because everybody in the Arab world knows Israel is not going to attack any Arab countries. The Arabs have nothing to fear from Israel, but they have a lot to fear from Iran and from the Shia crescent that starts with Iran, goes through northern Iraq, goes through parts of Syria, and then ends up with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there's great fear of that Shia arc, and Israel is an important part of protecting the Sunni Arabs against the Iranian hegemony, which poses great risks to the Sunni countries. So I think Israel is in a strategically strong position. When I spoke to President Trump about this, he talked about a regional peace rather than just peace between the Israelis and the Arabs. And I think a regional peace is essential, a peace that would have all of the Arab states in the region recognize Israel as the legitimate nation state of the Jewish people.
Do you have any insight? You've been at the front seat of it, or have a pretty front view into Middle East affairs. Do you have any insight either from your discussions with the president or from Netanyahu regarding the real viability of this Saudi relationship and how that might impact the development of peace in the Middle East?
Nobody can count on the Saudis. They are not a country. First, let me say they're not a country. They're a wholly owned family gas station, oil pumping station. If you go back 100 years to Saudi Arabia, it wasn't a country. Obviously, it was a group of tribes living in absolute destitute and poverty. It was like Yemen today. And then, why? Nobody knows the ways of Hashem, but he gave them oil. Fortunately, he's starting to make up for it a little bit with gas off the coast of Israel. And by the way, he did a good job, Hashem, because by not giving Israel oil, it encouraged them to develop high technology, which is more important than oil and more enduring than oil. But the Saudis, they're not a democracy. They're a government that's based on tribalism and family. And you never know what it will look like 2 years from now. The only stable democracy in the Middle East, obviously, is Israel. Everybody knows no matter what happens, Israel will support the United States. There were some demographics that just came out yesterday by the major demographic institute in Israel showing that by the year 2060, there will be 20 million Israelis. Remarkable on a country that started out with 600,000 people in 1948. 20 million Israelis, 30% of whom will be Haredi Jews. 30%. That's going to be a very, very high number. And the percentage of Jews and Arabs will remain the same. There is no increase in the population projected of Arab Israelis, but very significant increase in the population of Haredi Jews, which really means that Israel has to confront the issue directly of the role of Haredim in Israel, the role in the army, the role in universities, the role in politics. This has to be dealt with very, very seriously. And Haredim, as Arab Israelis, have to be made to feel like they're full and complete citizens. And it's a work in progress. It's not an easy thing to do because both Haredim and the Arabs have something in common. They both really want to live by themselves in more or less insular communities. Arab villages don't allow Jews to move in, and Haredi communities obviously want to remain Haredi communities. Integration is not the goal either of Haredim, nor is it the goal of Arab Israelis. So it's not going to be an easy job, but it's doable. And I'm waiting for the day when Israel's problems are all internal, and when they have to deal only with their domestic problems, and they don't have to worry about the threat of terrorism and the threat of a nuclear attack by Iran.
You mentioned that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. In advance of this event, the questions which I'm posing to you were culled from emails that I received. So here are a couple of emails that I'm not going to ask from you this evening. The first is, if Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, then how can you support the notion of a two-state solution? The other...
why don't I answer that?
Well, I want to give this to you as a couple.
Okay. Yeah.
The other set of emails that I got was Israel is a democracy in the Middle East, and unless there's a two-state solution, there will be a one-state solution, and it will be an Arab state. So we're dealing with two very polarized views of how to proceed. You clearly have a view on this, and I'm wondering if there's a way to thread that needle.
It's very hard. I spent part of this morning with Uri Ariel, who is the Minister of Agriculture in Israel and represents pretty much the extreme, I don't like to use the word extreme, but the far-right settler policy against two-state solution in favor of the annexation of Yehuda and Shomron. And I also spend time a lot with people on the hard left who don't even look at, there was a rumor, I don't know if it's true or not, that at Hebrew University, they won't allow the singing of Hatikva because it offends some Arab students. So you have views on both sides that are fairly extreme. Surprise? You're talking about Jews. Of course you're going to get extreme views. Jews voted for Mussolini, and Jews voted for Stalin. No, fortunately, none of them voted for Hitler. But Stalin and Mussolini, you're going to always get Jews. Who was it? Golden. Golden, the guy who used to write the, what's his first name? Harry Golden. He said Jews are like everybody else except more so. And so it's not surprising. And, the Torah tells us we're kshei oref. We're stiff-necked people. Very hard to talk us out of things. And so, you hear the most sincere people saying you can't have a two-state solution, and the most sincere people saying you can only have a two-state solution. In the end, it's not going to be decided in Flatbush. And it's not going to be decided in Turtle Bay. And it's not going to be decided in Foggy Bottom. It's not going to be decided anywhere but in Israel. It'll be decided by the people of Israel. Indeed, they've just passed a law in the Knesset that the Prime Minister of Israel cannot give back substantial territories in the West Bank without a referendum. And so there will be a referendum, and the people of Israel will decide. And you who supported Israel will feel bound by that resolution, and some of you will be unhappy with it. But you're not able to vote. Your children don't serve in the army. Your kids don't go on the buses that are in danger of being blown up. These decisions have to be made by Israelis. Were I an Israeli, I would be an advocate of a modified two-state solution. Why do I say modified? I believe that a Palestinian state, as Netanyahu has said, should be a state minus. It should not have an air force. It should not have tanks. It should not have an armed forces. It should be a demilitarized state. I also believe that Israeli occupation must continue for a period of time, military occupation, to make sure that the West Bank doesn't turn into Gaza, because the West Bank turning into Gaza is 5 times more dangerous than Gaza, because the West Bank is very close to the Ben Gurion airport, very close to Jerusalem, very close to Tel Aviv, indeed, and such a narrow country at its narrowest point. And so you can't, at least at this point in time, have a militarized full state with a foreign policy and borders that are protected by its own army. So I do not favor a two full state solution, but I do favor self-determination for the Palestinian people in large parts of what is now the West Bank or Yehuda and Shomron. I also believe that the settlement blocks should remain and that there should be land swaps. The land swaps should give options to Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel, Israeli Arabs who live in the Afula area up in the northeast of current Israel, to be able to vote by referendum whether they want to become part of a Palestinian entity or want to remain part of Israel. By the way, I think it'll be a real problem because I think the vast majority will want to remain part of Israel, and land swaps will be difficult because the problem with land is it comes with people. And when it comes with people, you can't tell people who are Israeli citizens that they can't be Israeli citizens. So it's going to be complex, but I do think that continuing settlements in areas that not have been settled, that areas close to Jericho, areas far out into the West Bank, I don't think it's a barrier to peace. I've never believed that, but I've never believed it was in the security interests of Israel. So I'd like to see compromise. Netanyahu has said both sides have to make painful compromises. Israel has offered to make those painful compromises. It offered it in 2001, when Prime Minister Ehud Barak with President Clinton offered the Palestinians 95% or so of the West Bank and 100% of the Gaza. Arafat rejected it and started an intifada. And then a few years later, Prime Minister Sharon left the Gaza. It could have become Singapore on the Mediterranean. They could have built it into a paradise. Instead, they turned it into a hell on earth with terrorism. And then in 2008, Prime Minister Olmert offered the Palestinians virtually the same deal that they had rejected in 2001 with a few sweeteners, even more. And it was not accepted. I spoke to Abbas about it recently. He said, we didn't reject it, we just didn't accept it. And there's some reality to that in the sense that Olmert got indicted and had to leave office. I mean, one of the great tragedies of Israel is the corruption. And I wish we had less of it. I wish we had less of it in the United States. It is really a shanda that so many Israeli political figures have been accused. Olmert is a very close friend of mine. I went to visit him in prison. It was a remarkable visit. There he was in a prison cell. And the man who took me to see him, the man who had the key to his prison cell, was a young Israeli Arab who was in charge of the former prime minister of Israel. You call that an apartheid country? The court that sentenced the former president of Israel to prison consisted of an Arab Israeli, a woman, and an Israeli Jewish man, a Jewish woman and an Israeli man. That's democracy at work. That's the rule of law at work. And it's painful and difficult when you see these things happening. So I think compromise is going to be necessary. If there is going to be peace, a third of the people in this room will be furious, a third will be angry, and a third will just be disappointed. Nobody will be happy. Nobody will be happy, because that's the nature of compromises. When I have a defendant and I have to make a deal with the government for my defendant, and I save the defendant the death penalty, and I get him instead 10 years in prison, he's furious at me. How did you get me 10 years? I should have won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's in the business I'm in, it's never good, better, best. Rarely. If you win an acquittal, it's good. But it's generally bad, worse, worser, worsest, and absolutely unacceptable. And those are going to be some of the options that both the Palestinians face and the Israelis face. And look what happened when Israel tried to make peace. Its prime minister was assassinated. When the Jordanians tried to make peace with Israel 50 years earlier, its king was assassinated. When Egyptians made peace with Israel, its president was assassinated. Passions run very, very high. One of the villains of 2000 and 2001 Arafat was actually thinking about the possibility of at least making a counteroffer to the Ehud Barak, Bill Clinton parameters. He was thinking about it, and then he sought advice from the worst possible person in the world, Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter told him not to do it. Jimmy Carter told him not to accept the Clinton parameters or else he'll be killed. And I can tell you President Clinton was furious at Jimmy Carter for undercutting American policy, for essentially committing, I don't even want to use the word treason, but it comes as close metaphorically to it as possible, undercutting the policy of the administration by telling an enemy, a terrorist enemy, not to accept a peace deal. I always talk about Yasser Arafat's untimely death. If he had only died 4 years earlier, there might have been peace, there might have been a solution, and now it's gotten harder and harder.
About a month or so ago, I had the pleasure of meeting you at the annual APAC Policy Conference. This shul, Kingsway Jewish Center, sent a delegation to that conference. And one of the most outstanding moments, aside from your remarks, was when the representative to the UN, the United States representative to the UN, Nikki Haley, spoke. When she walked out on the stage, it was a thunderous applause. I've never heard anything like it in my life. I thought the rafters were literally shaking and could come down. It was that powerful. And I think the reason for that is Nikki Haley's ability to and decision to speak truth to power resonates very powerfully. We live in a society where it seems everything is topsy-turvy. That Israel is depicted as the villain, and the villains are depicted as the righteous. And this seems to be in two main arenas. One at the UN, and the other on college campuses, the BDS movement. So my question to you is, how do you assess this, both of these phenomena, and how can we at all address it?
Well, as some of you probably know, I had the opportunity, and I turned it down, to represent Israel at the United Nations. Prime Minister Netanyahu and then Foreign Minister Lieberman came and asked me if I would become Israel's representative to the UN. They said I wouldn't have to give up my American citizenship. I would have to accept Israeli citizenship. I thought about it. It would have been the capstone of my career. Talking truth to power in that perverse place of hate would have been thrilling to me, but as an American, I just couldn't do it. I thought it would raise the specter of dual loyalty, and I am an American. And I didn't want to be in a situation where American politics, imagine if I had to cast the vote, I would have quit. Of course, I wouldn't have done it. Cast the vote not to veto the recent UN resolution. I would never have. She comes from my wife's home state. My wife's from Charleston, South Carolina. She grew up in the oldest Reform congregation in America, Beth Elohim in Charleston, and all of us who have a Charleston connection are very proud of Nikki. So that's the good news. Bad news is not only did we hear the applause for Nikki Haley, but so did Donald Trump. And I think it's no coincidence that Nikki Haley has been fairly quiet since that time. You don't want to outshine this president, and you don't want to show yourself as a potential competitor. I think she's been fantastic. She's a marvelous woman. You know, she comes from an ethnic Indian background. She's committed to Israel. She's a committed Christian and a deeply principled woman who nonetheless works for the United States State Department and has to do the bidding of the State Department. I think the UN is changing slowly and slightly. The new General Council of the UN, the new Secretary General of the UN, is very different from previous Secretary Generals. He has as his goal to make sure that Israel is no longer treated as a pariah nation. To go back 1975, the worst year in UN history, when 3 million Cambodians were being slaughtered, not a word, not a resolution, but they passed a resolution equating Zionism with racism. Or even during the Rwanda or the Darfur genocides, nothing. During the Syrian killings, nothing. But, Israel adds a bathroom in Malaya Dumim, and there's a UN resolution. It is so appalling, the double standard that applies at that place of hate. And then you turn to university campuses where you cannot have a rational discussion of the Middle East. It is absolutely impossible. But let me tell you a positive story. So I had a student who's my research assistant, very able guy, and in his last year at law school, he decided to take a course that was being offered by a professor who was teaching a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict. It was only one problem. He didn't know anything about it. He was a contracts professor. I don't know if he had ever even been in the Middle East, but he was a radical leftist. And if you're a radical leftist, you have to teach a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it has to be completely one-sided against Israel. Otherwise, you don't get street cred. So he decided to teach this class, and my research assistant, Joel, brought me the curriculum, and it was the syllabus. It was remarkable. I mean, it didn't even have any centrist articles. Everything was hard left, hard left, hard left. Israel colonialist, Israel imperialist, Israel genocide, Israel apartheid. So Joel went to the professor and said, look, this is not education, this is propaganda. Don't you think you should be adding some things? And Joel said, I'm not talking about Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, because that's an advocacy book too. And I believe that book, by the way, doesn't belong in a university class. I think university classes should consist of scholarly books, not advocacy books on either side. And so Joel came up with a series of books and articles that were scholarly books by Professor Morris of Israel about the refugees from the Palestinians, all down the middle. He just said, it's my class. I'll decide what to put in the syllabus. I'm not going to include any of your material. Joel said, Professor, it's not your class. It's our class. And he set up a counter syllabus online with the articles. For every article the professor assigned, he assigned a centrist article, not a left, not a pro-Israel article, a centrist article that really described the situation with nuance and calibration. By the end of the semester, more of the students were reading Joel's syllabus than were reading the professor's syllabus. So you can fight back. And you can fight back against BDS. You described BDS as a movement before. It's not a movement. A movement is something that's universal. Feminism is a movement. Gay rights is a movement. Environmentalism is a movement. BDS is not a movement. If it were a movement, it would apply to every country in the world. And every country would then be ranked by how seriously they violate human rights and how much access the victims of the violations have to the judiciary, the press, the political system. Israel would rank like 199th out of maybe 200 countries on any list by those criteria. Maybe even it would rank the lowest because of the media is freer in Israel and is more critical in Israel than in any country in the world today. And the judiciary is more open, much more open than the United States judiciary. So it's not a movement, it's a tactic. It's a tactic designed simply to delegitimate and demonize Israel. And nobody should think of it as a movement. Nobody should use positive terms about it. It's anti-Semitic. Let me give you the proof of it. So Oxford University invited me to debate BDS. It's now about a year and a half ago. And they had been inviting me for a number of years, and I always said no, because there's no way you can have a fair debate at Oxford University. It's where BDS started. But this time my granddaughter was a student at Oxford, so I had to accept. And I don't like to lose. So I came up with a theory about how I think I could win the debate at Oxford. And the debate was supposed to be me versus Barghouti, the founder of the BDS tactic. Barghouti refused to debate me, saying I am part of what he boycotts. But I'm not an Israeli. I'm a Jew. But if an Israeli Arab were to come, he would debate him. So it's not just anti-Israel, it's anti-Jewish. When they refused to allow Matisyahu to sing in Spain unless he rejected Israel, he's not an Israeli. He's a Jew. So BDS is deeply anti-Semitic. And we had the debate at Oxford, and we won. And we won fairly significantly. And the reason was not because I was a better debater than the other guy. The other guy is a terrific debater. You should watch it on YouTube sometime. His name is Peter Titchell. He's one of the leading human rights activists in Israel. It's because we have the better side of the argument. And I went into the audience and I said, I challenge all of you. It was an audience twice the size of this. I said, I challenge any of you to name one country in the world faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has a better record of human rights, higher compliance with the rule of law, and more concern with the lives of enemy civilians. I said, I have all day. Name a country. I waited. Nobody would shout out a country. Finally, somebody said, Iceland. Of course, it was a joke. Iceland hasn't had an enemy in 900 years. So when you make the argument, when you persuade the students that Israel has offered peace, Israel has offered 2 states since 1938, the Peel Commission 2 states, 1947 2 states, 1967 the Israelis offered to end the occupation in exchange for recognition. The Oslo Accords, 2000, 2001, 2005, 2008. And when you give the students those facts, they stand there with their mouths open. They never heard that in their classes. They had no idea that Israel ever offered to end settlements and occupation in exchange for peace. They just didn't know. They're being so miseducated. There's such academic malpractice going on at universities. You know what some of the worst places are? Jewish studies departments at major universities. Israeli studies departments at major universities are populated by anti-Israel zealots often. You have some pro-Israel people, but you have many who sign BDS petitions, many who sign petitions asking universities to sell their stocks and divest. And so we have a real problem within the Jewish community itself. And I know there are some people here who support J Street, but I have to say just one word about J Street. And that is J Street claims to be pro-Israel and pro-peace. It supported the UN resolution. It didn't even ask for the United States to abstain. It tried to get the United States to vote for the resolution declaring the Kotel to be illegally occupied territory. It supported the Iran deal over the opposition of virtually every Israeli political figure. J Street is so far to the left of the most extreme left wing in Israel. It doesn't represent the Tzipi Livni Herzog wing of Israel. That would be fine. It's way, way, way to the left of that. And J Street tries to get into the American Jewish mainstream. They say you should have an open tent. You should allow us in. You know who J Street won't allow to speak at any of its conventions? Me. I have offered over and over again, free of charge, no expenses, everything. I will speak at a J Street convention. They won't let me speak. They'll let Bennett speak. Why? Because they want to use somebody like Bennett as an exhibit. See, he doesn't support the two-state solution. See, he wants to continue the occupation. See what we have to face. But the last people they would ever allow to speak are people like Erwin Kotler and me, who are liberal supporters of Israel, who would speak to the students at J Street their own language. They would never invite Elie Wiesel to speak at J Street. So they want the mainstream Jewish organizations to open their tent, but they, J Street, have closed their tent to anybody but hand-picked speakers. And that's why I think it's so dangerous, the message that they're sending on college campuses. I do not think you can today describe J Street as a pro-Israel organization. I hope it will become one someday, but it's not there. And I renew my challenge to Ben Ami. Debate me in front of you. You know, he's willing to debate me in front of you. He's willing to debate me in front of AIPAC. He will not debate me in front of his own organization, because he knows that he is speaking out of two sides of his mouth to his own organization. They don't want to hear the truth about what J Street stands for. He puts out papers that suggest that J Street is really a moderate, centrist, slightly left organization, but that's not what it is.
You have known, I think, every Israeli prime minister since Golda Meir,
Right.
and you have known quite a few presidents of the United States. I'm wondering if you could share with us any interesting insights or anecdotes that maybe we wouldn't know, given that we're sitting from the 60,000 foot view.
How much time do you have?
About 2 hours.
So my first anecdote is Golda Meir. So I was going to Israel to interview Golda Meir. She was the prime minister for the TV show called The Advocates. I was the advocate for Israel. This was 1970. So Justice Goldberg, for whom I clerked, says, I hear you going to Israel. You got to bring my friend Golda what she likes. I said, what is it? She says, a carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes. This is before any of us knew what cigarettes did to you. I would never have done it. So, and he says, her security guards won't let her have it. So you have to sneak it in there. So my first job was I had to get past the security guards of the Prime Minister of Israel with a carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes, and I did it. I made it. I gave it to her. She was so happy. She says, Arthur told you, right? Yes, Arthur Goldberg. She took it out and smoked the cigarette right in my face. And then she invited me to have chicken soup with her on Friday night, and we developed a nice rapport. I met Menachem Begin when I was doing an article about a year later on human rights in Israel, and I was shocked because I thought Begin would be this right-winger. I had read biographies of Jabotinsky, and I meet Begin, and he is the most civil libertarian person in all of Israel. He's against administrative detention. He is in favor of full and complete due process. He was a lawyer. He was very proud of his law degree. Virtually all of Israel's founders, by the way, were lawyers, mostly recovering lawyers, lapsed lawyers, but people who had at least had a little a law school. And, you know, Israel has the best legal birth certificate of any country in the world. No country has that kind of legal status. Most countries have started by revolutions or by just carving up other areas. Israel, Balfour Declaration, UN, League of Nations resolutions all through Europe, UN resolutions, you name it. Israel's birth certificate is so legal, it's so legally valid, and yet it's the only country in the world whose legitimacy is today questioned by the United Nations and by the Human Rights Council and by Human Rights Watch and some other organizations. It's appalling. So then, flash forward, I can tell you anecdotes about so many. Well, I'll tell you a very sad anecdote about Prime Minister Rabin. So he was killed on a Motzei Shabbat night. And the Friday, 9 days earlier, his ambassador, his name was Rabinovich, came to see me at Harvard saying the Prime Minister of Israel is coming to Cambridge, Boston, 2 weeks from now for the GA, and he'd like to meet with you because he wants to talk to you about the incitements that are going on in Israel toward violence, and he's very worried that somebody might try to do harm to a political leader. And I put it in my little calendar. I was going to have a meeting with him, and of course, the next Shabbos night he was murdered by somebody on exactly that ground. He wanted to ask me whether or not there were ways of constraining incitement without violating free speech. And finally, my anecdote about Bibi, I mentioned it before when we were having dinner. So when Bibi gets elected, I was in Israel. He asked me, my wife, and my daughter to come to see him, and I go to see him. And he then takes me aside, and he says, I want to take you into my little private area where nobody could hear. I have to ask you something very confidential. Palestinians, Iran. He said, did O.J. Simpson do it? So I said, Mr. Prime Minister, does Israel have nuclear weapons? He said, you know I can't tell you that. I said, you know I can't tell you that. So those are my anecdotes.
Now, coming to a close, sadly, but on a sort of a broader thought, a broader topic, your life's work has not only been about advocacy for Israel, in fact, primarily in the law. If you had to choose one case that the Jewish community would remember you by,
Oh, yeah, that's easy.
what would it be and why?
Oh, that's so easy. The biggest fee I ever earned in my life was in the Etan Sharansky case. Now, of course, Etan Sharansky had no money, and I did it all on my own expense. I went to Russia many times. Erwin Cutler and I wrote the briefs on his behalf. We argued on his behalf. But when he crossed the Geineke Bridge and we came here and he threw his arms around me and he whispered in my ear, Baruch Matir Asurim. I'll never get a bigger fee than that in my life. And when he got arrested, his wife and his mother called me on the phone. His wife was then Natasha. She called me on the phone. She said, I have one wish. You must get my husband out of jail in time for me to have a baby. She was about 30 at the time, and we did it. And he got out of jail, and literally within 9 months had his first daughter, and I think within 18 months or 19, 20 months had his second daughter. I think of myself as a kind of Erwin and I as honorary godparents of his now two married children. It's been a long time, but the Sharansky case was the one case which, if I had one case to do in my life, it would be that one. And I think part of the reason is there, but for the grace of God, go I. I mean, my parents grew up in the border between great grandparents between Poland and the Ukraine in a town called Przemysl, another town called Rzeszów, and Natan's family grew up in the Ukraine. And my family took a left turn and came to America. His family took a right turn and ended up in the Soviet Union. If our parents had taken different turns, he would be the lawyer in America. He would have been a great lawyer. And hopefully, if I had the courage, I would have been the dissident. And I know he would have stood up for me, as he has stood up for many, many other people when he was the Minister of Absorption and did so many great, great jobs. So it's the thing I'm most proud of in my professional career. In my personal life, of course, the thing I'm most proud of is having 3 wonderful children, 2 wonderful grandchildren, an incredible wife, and parents who I didn't give them enough nachas. I gave them a lot of tsuris early on in life, but toward the end they got a little bit of nachas. Some of you may remember there was a debate sponsored by Hadassah. It must have been about 15 years ago. And my mother debated Joe Lieberman's mother. And the issue was which Jewish mother should have more nachas from their son. And I have it on videotape. It is one of the most remarkable things. Because Joe's mother was fantastic. My mother was so funny and so good. And the things you most are proud of in your life is obviously your family and those closest to you. And I think the other thing that I'm proud of, I hope, is that I was able to do a lot of work on behalf of causes, Jewish causes, liberal causes, other causes, without, I think, it having a negative impact on my family. I always put my family and my work on a kind of equivalent level. I never missed a kid's soccer game. I never missed a Seder. I never missed anything for my work, and I never missed my work because of my family. It was I just slept less, and and I think it all grows out of my background. Growing up in a modern Orthodox community in Borough Park in the 1940s and 50s was such an incredible gift. We lived full lives of Americans. I'm wearing on my hand now the 1947 Brooklyn Dodger National League Championship ring that was worn by Jackie Robinson during his rookie year in baseball. So my connections to Brooklyn are never, ever far away. And I always think whatever I have become, it's a result of being born in Williamsburg, moving to Borough Park, going to yeshiva, and having the background and education I had. So I'm so happy to come home to a congregation that reminds me of my own congregation. Thank you very much, Professor Dershowitz. Thank you all for coming. And we thank all our sponsors and the Morris Novel Development Institute and our benefactor, Dr. Freya
novel, Professor Dershowitz, and we wish you many more sleepless nights. During this period, the boardroom, everyone is invited.